And welcome back to a new episode of Dynasty Mind. My name is Chris Chung. Find me on Twitter at FFDynasty101. I've been going through the series of Dynasty Mind and picking on the minds of the brightest in the industry. And through this series, I am talking about IDP, and I have the pleasure to invite Joe Redemann from DLF and Number Fire to come on tonight to talk a little bit with us about IDP and specifically about the defensive line position. Joe, how are you doing today?
Good, Chris. I'm really glad to be on. We were just talking off air that it's been kind of a long time building up to this to finally find a time that works for us. But I'm super pumped to be getting to talk more IDP. I never
Yeah,
get enough of that.
yeah, man. I'm very excited to have you. I know you are very passionate about this type of way to play fantasy football, and especially in the dynasty world, you are very much involved in all sorts of aspects. But your specialty for me, it seems like it's the IDP, and I have the great pleasure of having you to just close out the series tonight with our last position of discussion. So, Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved with fantasy football, moving to Dynasty, and then became a fanatic just like the rest of us to do IDP Dynasty.
Yeah. So fantasy football, I believe I started playing all the way back when I was maybe 10. So back in the early aughts, I put together a Yahoo fantasy football team with my mom. We co-owned a team because I wasn't old enough to own my own team yet, per Yahoo's rules. Thanks, stick in the muds. No, but it was fun. It was a blast to be, to be able to play on a team together. My mom introduced me to football originally as well. We're huge Packer nuts, and then from there it just kind of kept going. I started building my own sort of really rudimentary, like value-based drafting models. Like I noticed that some positions scored more than others as a whole, even at 14, 15. And so I started picking that stuff apart and building really, really rough ranks for myself. But yeah, then from there, it just kind of it stayed a hobby for a long time until about 6 or 7 years ago. I started writing for a small and now defunct blog called Top Team Fantasy. Jonathan Vandersloot, if you're listening, shout out to you. He gave me my first shot at writing. And then from there, I sort of approached JJ Zachariason of Number Fire, and they were looking to really expand their writing team. And so I got into, actually being a semi-professional writer. And then the guys at Dynasty League Football brought me on to do IDP specifically. And it was only a couple of years into my writing that I started to hear about IDP. It seemed really compelling to me that, there was this kind of way to play that we didn't think about prior to, that a lot of people don't think about that other side of the ball. We draft a defense special teams unit and then call it a day in most redraft leagues. But I loved the idea that I could own BJ Raji in a fantasy league. I love the idea that, Clay Matthews mattered more than just 1 point, so I got super into the idea of IDP, and the more I dug into it, the more I loved it. And actually, I started getting interested in the idea of IDP even before Dynasty itself. So I kind of flipped that. I didn't go Dynasty to IDP. I went, oh, this is super cool. I wonder if we can do this. And oh, wait, this is even better. This will be exactly like you run a real NFL team, but fake. So yeah, it's been a long and winding road of just me building up to being a full-on degenerate. I now play in a 30-team IDP league
Wow.
with single copy players too. I might add, it's bonkers, and I love it. So
Awesome, yeah, and your journey to the IDP and getting to become such a big fan of Dynasty football, that's fantastic. It's a little similar, but a lot more different because you started IDP before you even knew about Dynasty. So that is something very interesting to me, to a lot of our viewers and listeners. I'm sure you guys aren't familiar with IDP until you got into Dynasty, but you brought in that, and you mentioned BJ Raji and Clay Matthews. Can I assume that you are a Packers fan?
Yes. I am a dyed-in-the-wool green and gold Packers fan. Was raised from birth to be that. And like I said, interestingly, it was my mom that got me into football. My dad does not care a jot about sports.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so yeah, it's my mom and I texting every Sunday in the fall.
That is awesome. Does she have a part-time ownership or part ownership of the Green Bay Packers?
No, I don't think we're official owners, but she definitely gets like a part-time stake in any sort of winnings I make in fantasy football. I like to, one day I'll buy my mom like a Hot Wheels car.
Man,
I'll have it.
that is some awesome. That's an awesome story. I've rarely hear about moms getting the son into football, but both of you are getting to enjoy the Sunday and also the fake side of football, or we so-called fake side. So that is awesome to hear about your process. So now, again, we mentioned that your specialty is in IDP, and you got into it. You got really into it. Tell us, what is your thoughts on the landscape of IDP, how it started, the general scoring that's out there, and tell us a little bit about what your favorite types of format is.
Yeah. So I'm not even sure where IDP started. We've got such a long history of a documented history of fantasy football in general, but we don't have really a good idea of who is the first person to put together an IDP team. Because for a long time, actually, IDP stats, the defensive stats were really inconsistently kept. I think up until maybe 1993, don't quote me on that, but up until the early 90s, they were set to individual teams scoring tackles or sacks or interceptions. So they were all technically unofficial. And that's, I'm going to be a little bit more of a homer here, but that is the reason why Reggie White doesn't have the all-time sack record, is because they only started keeping track of sacks as an official statistic later in his career. Um, so I mean, it's a really interesting thing that for the longest time, I mean, I'm sure there were some people who played in proto IDP leagues, but they all had to, by hand basically score something by hand. It was taking it out of the newspaper that was tracked by, just the local statistician, not the NFL itself. But that said, we're now at the point where we're not even thinking about just IDPs in general. Some leagues have just a general single IDP slot, but other leagues have a defensive line spot and then a linebacker and a defensive back. We're at the point though where we have defensive tackle specific and cornerback specific, and there's rumblings that some of our big dynasty league providers might be going towards adding even specific outside linebacker versus inside linebacker designations eventually. So we're getting into this point where we have so much data that we're able to drill down to such an intense level and really immerse the way that I know that I love. Some people are going to be overwhelmed by all that information though, and go for more of the position group units, defensive end, defensive tackle together, cornerback, safety together. But that's whatever you want to play, whatever comfort level you have, that's up to you. For me, the more the merrier. Yeah, and as far as IDP scoring, it's really interesting to me too that a lot of people play in leagues, at least at first, where the scoring is minimal. They don't like the idea of a defensive player swinging the balance too much. In comparison to the quarterbacks or the running backs. But to me, that's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of, you have a lot of hesitance from owners or from a lot of owners in leagues when you convert to IDP for the first time. Because they go, well, either it's going to swing it a lot and it's going to be random, or they go, well, it's not going to matter. And if you dampen scoring, if you make it small, then it won't matter. And then you kind of go, well, see, I told you it won't matter. But but I think there's a good reason to have balance. There's a good reason to have sort of an impactful scoring system. I think I can't remember. I'm gonna feel so bad about not being able to properly credit these guys. It might have been Tyler Huggins and somebody else, but they created the no position left behind scoring system,
Yes.
which balanced the whole IDP landscape, as well as making it on par with offensive players. And I think that's great. Again, that's your advanced level. If you want to go for the classic, what I call the standard of IDP scoring, it's 1 point per tackle, half for an assist, 3 for sacks, interceptions, tackles for a loss, fumbles recovered, and forced fumbles, that sort of stuff. Basically, it's a 3-to-1 ratio of big plays to tackles. And that sort of seems to be what a typical balanced scoring system, and sort of the nice, easy way to get into it. I'm at the point where I now play in a lot of big play leagues. That's my personal favorite. So you have your interceptions worth like a 6-to-1 ratio versus tackles, and sacks are closer to 4 or 5 points versus 1, and same for tackles for a loss and fumble points. So it kind of just depends. Again, IDP is such a malleable thing because there is no real standard. It depends on the experience you want to have.
Absolutely. And I think that's the joy of dynasty football, is that you can set up your league in a way that just be enjoyable for you. And what it makes sense to me, and I think it made sense to you too, for the no player left behind kind of system, is that it evens out the top score from the defensive side as well as the offensive side, and makes sense for trading purposes, roster constructions, and the most fun of all, I've seen different types of league that try to match the NFL schemes, like we'll have a 4-3 kind of scheme, 3-4 kind of scheme. Big play is something that I'm still trying to get into. I know that it makes sense, but it also makes such a big swing if you hit the right guy and the high variance. So how do you deal with that when it comes to the scoring variance of IDP players?
Yeah, I think that's it's a little bit of the nature of IDP, but it's a little bit of the nature of a game. So the way that I think about it, and again, a lot of the stuff that I've learned comes from a lot of articles, and I learned about sort of what was called the ideal IDP scoring system. Somebody at I think it might have been Pro Football Focus. Here it is. It was Jeff Radcliffe, where he looked at IDP scoring, and he and Ross Miles sort of actually took statistical probability of events and how those events in a football game swung win probability, and assigned points based on that. And so that's where you get a little more of a big play buildup. So you have sacks at 4 points. You have solo tackles around 1.5 or 1. Tackles for a loss at 2 or 3. Interceptions at 6, because you have those big game swinging events. An interception turns over the field for the offense, right? Your cornerback takes the ball away. That swings a lot for the game. A sack definitely pushes the offense back and stunts some of their win probability. And so I love that idea of making the game, at least for me in my leagues, making the game reflect as much of the NFL experience as possible. So that's why I go with those sort of real data-driven ratios for my scoring systems.
Awesome. I think that makes sense too, because in the even on the offensive side, we try to make the scoring match the impact of the game. We added PPR because we now realize, it makes wide receivers it helps wide receivers become more valuable. Whereas in the old days, before passing game were up to 40-50 passes per game, they were generally very much wide receivers aren't as valued as running backs. So we added that, and now it's become a standard in most fantasy leagues to have PPR, just because we want to make sure that those catches have effect on both the fantasy team and as well as it does on the for the real teams. So tell us, Joe, through your years of playing IDP, what are some of the myths that are still out there about IDP, and how do you want to dispel them?
I think one of the biggest myths is that you have to draft IDP high, or that especially defensive backs have to be drafted high. And I'm gonna kind of go biggest shell to smallest shell here. Very, very specifically, I still see a lot of people in rookie drafts and dynasty leagues drafting cornerbacks and safeties in the early rounds, like second, third round of leagues in a 7 round draft, let alone cornerbacks basically at all. And I this to me is mind blowing, because I know that there's the rookie cornerback effect where, say, there's a rookie starter at cornerback. We had Jalen Ramsey a couple of years ago, or last year was Tre'Davious White in Buffalo. They get targeted a lot by opposing passing offenses, but that's usually 1 or 2 cornerbacks a year that really make a big impact in their rookie season, because opponents think that they can exploit that rookie cornerback. Uh, Really, though, the cornerbacks are the most inconsistent week to week and year to year players. It's the most inconsistent position in the game. And that's primarily because they do thrive on that big play. Most of the points come from passes defensed or interceptions, which are really plays determined by where the offense is going to go. They're not even like a safety where they can kind of roam across the field towards the play. They have a specific assignment on either one side of the field or one zone or one man. And so, to me, it just blows my mind that people still think that you need to pay for cornerbacks. You absolutely don't. You can stream them in season. You can wait until week 1 kicks off and grab a cornerback for Sunday night or Monday night football, and you will still be fine, even if you didn't get a guy like, I don't even know, Jalen Ramsey or AJ Boye. You don't have to pay for cornerbacks. That's the biggest thing that I see.
Excellent point. I think that this really ties in well with Doug Green, who I had on last time to talk about cornerbacks. And definitely, there are still this sense for people are trying to grab the big name guys because they are big name guys, you know. But we kind of know that there's a week to week difference, and you have to understand this scheme. And maybe that's something that will help forces grow too if we start understanding how coaches use these cornerbacks. Are they man? Are they zone? Do they primarily play one side of the field like Richard Sherman? And we're also getting news right now that Patrick Peterson is not going to look for his shadow anymore. Does that impact his IDP value? So that's a lot of things that we can learn about the game. I think that will really help sharpen ourselves both the defensive side as well as the offensive side if we start broadening our perspective of both sides of the football game.
Well, and I think sticking to with even our positional topic tonight, defensive tackles are the same way. You shouldn't be valuing, except for Aaron Donald, who's now a defensive end in most leagues. You really shouldn't be valuing defensive tackles the same as you do most defensive ends. They are the same inconsistent scorers in fantasy because of the role that they play in the actual NFL.
Perfect. That segues into our topic for tonight of defensive linemen, and you're bringing in a different perspective that I don't often hear, because defensive end, because of their positional scarcity, I've often heard on the Twitterverse or in articles that grab your defensive end over other positions first, because they run out, they become very scarce. But if you get a top one, you're pretty much locked in for good production from, say, an Aaron Donald or who was that defensive end a few years back that was J.J. Watt was still
That J.J.
considered.
Watt guy, is he a thing?
Who
He
was
plays
he?
football. He plays football still.
Right. So tell us about the defensive lineman. What have we to learn about this position, and how can we get better at identifying a good player for our team?
Yeah. Well, so like I was saying before, the biggest thing about this is um, you can't look at big names. So you have to look at the roles that they play. DeForest Buckner, for instance, great name, hyper impressive rookie when he came out for San Francisco, and I believe he was playing defensive end for them. But San Francisco's now shifted their scheme so that he's a three technique defensive tackle. He's still impressive, relative to defensive tackles, but overall in the defensive line scoring, he's closer to sort of a middling defensive lineman number 2 in most leagues, by my projections. You have to look primarily at who's playing what. JJ Watt plays a 5 technique on the 3-4 Houston line. So he's a defensive end, sort of waves into the middle every now and then on passing downs as well. But he primarily gets to rush the passer because that's his role. DeForest Buckner is going to be doing a lot more, working on just maintaining the line of scrimmage, plugging up gaps in the middle, not as much rushing the passer as a defensive end in most cases. Similarly, defensive tackles are even more so just going to stay at home and block the line. That's it. I'm sorry, one technique defensive tackles or nose tackles. They are going to stay right in the middle of the line and just play the run for the most part. So, there is a hierarchy of positional value at the defensive line that you have to be aware of. Sure, you have some studs who break the mold like that, like J.J. Watt, like Aaron Donald. You've got guys who have shown out in big ways in the past that, that really throw the whole thing for a whack, but those guys are exceptions to the rule. You can grab your JJ Watts and your Aaron Donalds early and feel really good about it because, yes, relative to the baseline, to the replacement value at the position, they are super valuable. But after that first tier, it's a thing where you can wait for a while. You don't want to be caught grabbing. I like to think of defensive line almost as the running backs of the defensive side. You want to grab one of the top guys early if you can, but if you get into that middle range, don't stress over it. They start to get very similar. And specifically, don't grab your second defensive lineman unless it's Aaron Donald still on the board that early. You don't need to have a loaded defensive line. You need to have guys in good spots, in good positions to produce. Guys like that in the past have been in Jim Schwartz defenses. So right now he's the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. Brandon Graham is a guy I really like this year still. I think he's going to be in a great position to succeed. You have guys like Khalil Mack, who's also a stud that just keeps producing depending on whether he's classified as a D end or a linebacker. The biggest things that you want to look for, though, are guys who are going to rush the passer and get you big play points because the defensive line is not very tackle friendly. And you want to have guys who are going to play a lot of snaps. So rotational guys that don't play a ton of plays, like, for instance, defensive ends in, now I'm blanking on his name, Greg Williams schemes. Defensive ends for Greg Williams have succeeded in the past, Robert Quinn being a primary one of them, but I wouldn't treasure them as highly as some other guys. So Myles Garrett is super impressive on a play-by-play basis, but he's probably only going to see about 550 snaps or so this year to me. So that puts him more into that second defensive end tier.
Huh. Wait, even Myles Garrett was not. You're not expecting him to see an uptick. So that is an interesting perspective. I was about to ask you what position you would compare them to on the offensive side. You said running back, and now as you talk more about it, it makes sense. Now we're looking at per snap count basis is similar to if you're having a 2 down back versus a 3 down back. That's very, very interesting perspective. So, give us a little preview about what you think of the defensive line. How would you tier them? Who are your top ones, and who are the ones that you can wait a little bit more, but still make up a weekly type of starter? And who are the ones that you would start streaming?
Yeah. So my top two are real easy. As long as he comes back healthy, JJ Watt is number one for me. Aaron Donald comes in a very, very close second. And that's, he's just been phenomenal no matter what he's been asked to do in what scheme. Those guys are transcendent stars. Beyond that, we get sort of a muddy range of guys like Cam Jordan, Brandon Graham, Everson Griffin, last year's breakout sensation DeMarcus Lawrence. All those guys are very good, but not quite transcendent stars. They're going to be your defensive end ones easily this season, but they don't have the same kind of oomph as your superstars. After that, it's a lot of part and parcel. I mean, you have the Carlos Dunlaps, who I think is going to take a big step back this year. I've got him outside of my top 16 defensive ends. You've got guys like Jerry Hughes, Derek Barnett, Chandler Jones, all of these guys who have week to week upside and can push into that defensive end one range in any given week. Say they have 2 or 3 sacks in a game, then that's where some of that stuff pays off. But really, it's not. From there, you don't have to really stress it. After, I'd say probably once you get to the range of, once Cam Hayward and Trey Flowers go off the board, don't worry, you're going to get plenty of guys just fine. Even Joey Bosa, I think, is sort of in that third tier range. Based depending on your scoring system, and a lot of this, like we talked about, depends on your scoring system. I do my scorings for balanced scoring systems. I do my projections that way. If you have more tackle heavy league, it's going to favor guys like it's going to favor guys like Carlos Dunlap a little bit more. Joey Bosa is going to get an uptick there. If you have big play heavy leagues, then guys like Chandler Jones, Mario Addison are going to be, rocketing up the charts themselves. So you have to read your scoring system and know what to expect. And those guys that are speed rushers, think Vic Beasley on one hand. Those guys are going to have a lot more value in big play leagues, but they're going to be rough in tackle heavy leagues. In tackle heavy leagues, a guy like Trey Flowers is a lot more valuable than just in a big play league.
Awesome. Thank you for dropping the knowledge on us. I like that. I was waiting for the name Joey Bosa, and it's a surprise to me that he's not even that consistent to be in the second kind of tier. Also had thoughts of Melvin Ingram, who was fantastic last year, but was he marred by injury towards the end of the year?
I think he was a little bit banged up, but more so again, where it comes down for me is Gus Bradley rotates his defensive ends. Mm-hmm. And so, based on the projections, the way that those two performed last year blew my projections out of the water. So based on the average that I'm expecting for them, I've got them a little bit lower, but those are some names that could really rocket up if things go right. I will say too, this is a little bit of knowledge that I get to drop here, a little tidbit. Seattle Seahawks rookie Rasheem Green, depending on if he wins a starting role with that team, I've got him inside of my top 25 defensive ends for this season. I love that kid, and I think he's almost exactly a plug and play Michael Bennett as long as he proves that he can pick up the scheme.
Wow. Okay, so that is the name to file away, everyone. It's too late for me because some IDP guy, I think it was Adam TZ or Devin, somebody already scooped him up in my leagues, but that's a great name to know. I'll have to file that away and try to see if I can wrestle that from someone else. Because you're right, the Seattle defensive team is really wide open now that they've gotten rid of a lot of the older folks that made the Legion of Boom. So Joe, looking forward, I like to, kind of touch on some of the work you have in store for us, and you might be the first of its kind to look deep into the Devi world and the rookie world of IDP, projecting ahead of us. How do you know the strength of a rookie class from an IDP perspective, say coming into 2018? What were some of the signs in the offseason that told you what this class would be like, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are?
Yeah, I think a big thing, this is going to seem really obvious and a little bit dumb, but a big thing is you look at the class before, and you know, we had a lot of really impressive defensive units in college football last season. I'm just thinking of Ohio State, Clemson, like some of those big loaded defensive lines, and they didn't lose a ton of players in the draft this past year. Alabama is perpetually an incredible unit on the defensive line. But there weren't a ton of those big name players coming out from those schools. And so with that in mind, we can kind of expect that a lot of those guys, should be coming out this next year. Specifically the Clemson unit, the Clemson group is going to be insane to watch. I'm already drooling thinking about, their tape, but they, it's that idea of sort of you have to sort of mentally track the trends. And, specifically, I like to look at the SEC as the big marker for this. They are one of the, strongest conferences in college football when it comes to defensive line play. When you think throwback smash mouth football, it's running backs and defensive lines. That's what they're good at. And so, really, if I have to give one barometer, it's how many SEC defensive linemen came out last year. That's the big one for me.
Oh man, and if we're talking about SEC, it's always Alabama that like produces those big boys. The Deshaun Hand, I think, was it Deshaun Hand?
Deshaun Hand this year.
Deron Payne.
Deshaun Robinson last year. Yep, Deron Payne.
Yeah. And of course, I pay more closer attention to the ACC. So if you haven't gotten to Miami, folks, yet, Shaquille Quarterman. That's a guy
yes.
that's like going to be in all of my cheat sheet even before we have to look forward. So
Joe Jackson awesome. Is named to watch there too.
Yes, Joe. Oh, I can't believe I missed that name. Joe Jackson would be a huge loss for our school when he declares next year. So, and he shares a great name. I mean, who doesn't want to be named Joe? Come on. So, tell us then, Joe. I have to thank you for coming on tonight. You dropped some fantastic knowledge. It really helped me as well, even though I've been playing IDP for quite some time, to re-evaluate my process and to be able to play it better and understand where my weaknesses are. Tell us where we can find your work. Tell us what you have upcoming in store, and let people know where they can find you and talk to you.
Yeah, so you can always find me on Twitter at JAYARRNFL. I always spell it out because if I just say JRNFL, they'll just spell that out. I've done that before. So yeah, that's where I am, where all of my terrible takes are. All of my writing is on numberfire.com or dynastyleaguefootball.com, but I also do put out articles and sort of my own passion project research on deepleaguediving.wordpress.com. I also do a weekly podcast that's going to be kicking back up called The Forward Progress. That's all over the place. If you have a podcast app, you'll find it somewhere. And other than that, if you want single season redraft projections, all of my IDP projections are available on thehuddle.com. And sort of one last thing, I guess, Chris, is what you touched on a little bit, is I'm going to be releasing not only an IDP rookie draft guide next year for fantasy football purposes, I'm going to be doing a Devi draft guide. And what I think is possibly the first compiled scouting and statistics guide that's happened.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty pumped about that.
It's awesome. I know I've been following you through Twitter, and you were telling your followers about how excited you are for this project, and I am particularly excited about it because someone did ask me on Twitter, "Hey, who is a Devi IDP guy out there?" It's like, oh man, this is such a niche kind of field. But whoa, Joe, yeah, he talked about it. So immediately I thought of you. So now we can associate you being the Devi IDP guy on the Twitterverse, and hopefully you will be the guy that I can refer to for all things related to Devi IDP.
More than happy to help however I can. I'm so pumped to talk about this whenever I get the chance to.
Awesome. Any idea when you'll launch?
The rookie guide should definitely be up by the end of next May. I don't like to put out the rookie guides before the draft as much because so much changes about an IDP's valuation based on their landing spot. Just thinking even about guys like Arden Key this past year, where he's going to play an odd sort of stand-up linebacker role in Oakland. That shifts his value, whereas he could have been a really great 4-3 defensive end. So that one is I'm targeting May for the rookie draft guide, but hopefully February or March for the Devi guide, because as soon as the college football season ends, that's when we'll be into draft content and going.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I am excited for it. I will remind people about it once the off season hits that, hey, we got a guy who will be covering this, and I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to your work. I've already seen your work, so I know they're quality works. And again, people don't listen to him that he has bad takes. If he does, it's all the influence from JJ Zacharyson, his terrible takes. It's a 6 degree of separation from between you guys. So thank you again, Joe, for joining me tonight and closing out our IDP Dynasty series. I hope you have a great night. Guys, you can find me at FF Dynasty on Twitter. You can find this show at YouTube on Dynasty Mind. Just type in Dynasty Mind. I have other shows on there as well to talk about all facets of Dynasty. Thank you so much and have a great night.